Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to explore a truly fascinating collision. We're looking at the intense intersection between modern Middle East peace strategies and ancient biblical history. We constantly see headlines about treaties, proxies, and protests, but we rarely step back to look at the underlying architecture of all this violence, and more importantly, the radically different ways humanity tries to solve it. So get ready, because we're going to map current geopolitical headlines right onto ancient prophetic warnings, and the parallels are absolutely striking. Okay, let's dive into this by looking at an ancient Hebrew word that perfectly diagnoses our modern world: Hamas. Now, we aren't just talking about random chaos or street crime here. In the biblical framework, Hamas is structural, institutional violence. It's the deliberate weaponization of legal and economic systems by the powerful to destroy shalom, which means wholeness, justice, and societal peace. Basically, it's when the very structures that are meant to protect people are actually engineered to plunder them. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. First, the anatomy of Chamas. Second, top-down pragmatic peace. Third, the bottom-up institutional critique. Fourth, the trap of zealotry. And finally, the cosmic boomerang.
Section 1. The anatomy of Chamas, specifically looking at Iran's structural violence.
When you take this ancient concept of Chamas and apply it to the modern Iranian regime, you get a textbook manifestation of structural violence functioning as a political apparatus. You've got these three internal pillars of oppression. First, the state uses weaponized courts to entirely strip citizens of due process, often executing dissidents under vague divine charges like moharabe, or enemy against God. Then you have economic Chamas. It's an elite kleptocracy where the Revolutionary Guard literally monopolizes the nation's wealth. They're even diverting water rights, which triggers ecological collapse, while everyday citizens are forced into systemic poverty. And finally, when those defenseless citizens actually protest, the regime responds with raw, lethal force and internet blackouts to completely silence the cry of the marginalized.
But here's the thing. Chamas doesn't just stay neatly within its own borders. The regime exports this violence step by step through a massive proxy strategy. By funding groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, and the Houthis, they project power and actively destabilize neighboring states. This is a deliberate, calculated tactic to wage a multi-front war while still keeping plausible deniability. And what does this actually do? It traps ordinary civilians across the entire Middle East in a perpetual, self-reinforcing boomerang cycle of bloodshed. The entire region is effectively held hostage by a system built on moral catastrophe.
Section 2. Top-down pragmatic peace, focusing on the Abraham Accords. So how do modern politicians try to actually stop this? Well, we're going to look at two deeply contrasting frameworks. For proponents of top-down statecraft, like the Abraham Accords, the ultimate goal is concrete regional stability. They defined true peace, or shalom, as the absence of state-level warfare and the opening up of commerce. By fostering economic integration and technological cooperation between sovereign states, this strategy attempts to just bypass the endless cycles of historical violence. It's really all about dismantling the rejectionist veto, which is the power of extremist factions to block progress. It prioritizes tangible, pragmatic security guarantees and mutual prosperity over waiting around for some kind of ideological perfection that might literally never come. Section 3. The bottom-up institutional critique, examining the DSA perspective.
Now, let's flip the script to a completely opposing framework. From the progressive, bottom-up perspective, those exact same top-down peace deals are viewed as just another form of institutional chamezas. Highlighted in our sources through the lens of the Democratic Socialists of America, or DSA, this critique argues that agreements brokered between ruling elites are purely transactional. They're fundamentally unjust if they deliberately sideline the core issues of Palestinian self-determination and human rights. This view prioritizes equity for the marginalized above all else, arguing that any system that just maintains the status quo for the vulnerable is really just masking oppression. To them, trading geopolitical favors and arms sales for diplomatic handshakes, that isn't peace at all. It's a structural failure that totally ignores the immediate suffering of the defenseless.
And this brilliantly illustrates the profound ideological split we're dealing with here. On one side, you have top-down pragmatism. It achieves incredible stability and order, for sure, but it carries the massive danger of pragmatic compromise, essentially building peace on a foundation that potentially excludes the defenseless altogether. On the other side, the bottom-up approach fiercely pursues justice and equity, demanding that oppressive structures be dismantled. But its immense danger is revolutionary instability.
Adopting anti-establishment stances runs the very real risk of validating violent impulses without actually offering a constructive, realistic path to peaceful governments. Which leads us to a massive, narrative-hinged question. If top-down deals risk ignoring the oppressed and bottom-up revolutions risk unleashing even more violence, how do you actually defeat a system of chamas without becoming it? This right here is the ultimate dilemma of human political systems. Section 4. The Trap of Zealotry. Exploring a biblical history of revolution. Let's rewind a bit to see how this historical trap builds over time. It's almost ironically tragic how predictably human this is, because we've been making the exact same revolutionary mistakes for 3,000 years. The biblical narrative is fiercely partisan toward the oppressed, absolutely, but it's deeply skeptical of human revolution. Take Jeroboam's revolt in 930 BCE. The people's grievances were entirely validated, yet the second he gained power, Jeroboam established a system that was just as corrupt. Then you've got Jehu's coup in 841 BCE. He was divinely anointed to overthrow a tyrant, but his campaign almost immediately spiraled into absolute massacre and raw personal ambition. Even the Maccabean revolt in 167 BCE, which started as a successful, necessary guerrilla war for survival, eventually hardened into a corrupt dynasty and gave birth to the highly oppressive zealot movement. The pattern is incredibly stark. Revolutionaries almost always end up inheriting the spiritual rot of the system they overthrow. The prophet Hosea delivers this chilling retrospective verdict on Jehu's supposedly righteous revolution. He says, "I will punish the house of Jehu for the massacre at Jezreel." It proves that the human execution of a revolution against chamas almost always just turns into more chamas. You don't actually get true liberation, you just end up trading tyrants. The entire machinery of oppression stays completely intact. Literally only the personnel at the top changes. Section 5. The Cosmic Boomerang and Divine Sovereignty. Against this pretty grim backdrop of endless historical violence, a radical paradigm shift is introduced to finally break the cycle. When Jesus steps into this exact historical tension, living directly under the Chamas of the Roman Empire, his response is a definitive, absolute rejection of bottom-up revolutionary violence. He says, "Put your sword back in its place, for all who draw the sword will die by the sword." This is absolutely crucial to understand. This wasn't a call to submissively just accept tyranny, not at all. It was the announcement of a completely different kind of resistance, a non-violent unmasking of state cruelty that simply refuses to play by the oppressor's rules. So the core takeaway is this: you cannot cast out the spirit of Pharaoh using the methods of Pharaoh. Instead of relying on human bloodshed to achieve human justice, this paradigm introduces the concept of the cosmic boomerang. It's the idea that systems built on moral catastrophe, systems that intentionally plunder the poor and weaponize the law, inherently call forth their own undoing. True trust relies on the belief that the violence these oppressive empires unleash will eventually return right back upon their own heads through divine sovereignty. There is no reciprocal human slaughter required. We've covered a lot today: the brutal reality of structural violence, the specific flaws in our pragmatic treaties, the absolute dangers of our righteous revolutions, and the radical alternative of nonviolent resistance. So I want to leave you with this final thought. If true peacemaking demands confronting institutional chamas without replicating its violence, what does a modern peacemaker truly look like? How do we actively pursue wholeness and justice today, while avoiding the machinery of oppression on one side and the trap of zealotry on the other? It's a massive challenge, and one that absolutely demands our attention. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the structures around you.